Chris, the webinar's started. We're just waiting for some attendees. You can see on the right-hand side, people are joining.
I'll start in 1 minute. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Africa Communicators Exchange event on infrastructure development. Despite immense progress, Africa still faces serious infrastructure gaps. A World Bank study recently found that the poor state of infrastructure in many parts of Africa reduced national economic growth by 2 percentage points every year and cut business productivity by as much as 40%. How can Africa progress at sufficient pace to close the infrastructure gaps? And what are the challenges to be overcome? And what role can we as communicators play in advancing the critical infrastructure that is needed to enable the continent's agricultural, industrial and digital revolutions? With me today to discuss these points are Lillian Nganda, Regional Customer Communications Manager, Africa, AP Moller Maersk, the world's leading provider of integrated logistics solutions that connect, protect and simplify supply chains. And Andrew Murray Watson, Head of UK Media at British International Investment PLC, the UK's development finance institution involved in investing in major infrastructure projects across the continent. Welcome both. I'd like to ask each of our speakers to say a few words about what their job entails and the role of their organisation in advancing Africa's vital infrastructure. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So, Lillian, could I ask you to say a little bit about how Maersk is contributing towards the physical infrastructure needed to move goods?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And a very good day to proceed to the next slide. A very good day to you all from everywhere you're joining us from. I'm Lillian Nganda, and it's such a great honor to be part of this timely discussion. On display is a quick short bio of my background and a lot more on LinkedIn, so feel free to join me there for further discussions. I joined Maersk in January to handle customer communications for Africa. And what this really means is tapping into our history of 100+ years and turning that into insightful thought leadership content that will really help our customers shape their supply chain. And there's also never a dull day in Africa, so I do handle issues and crisis communications directly to our customers. So when we look at the role Maersk and organizations generally in Africa that are playing in developing vital infrastructure, I'd really like to share our purpose at Maersk that really embodies this role. Moving on. Improving life for all by integrating the world. And what we see here is we believe in an integrated world, one planet connected all the way, a world where an exchange of goods can create exchange of culture, innovation, and trust. At Maersk, we're really looking to do more than moving the food, the clothes, the medicines, and so on. We're looking to integrate Africa, and this is exactly what the Africa trade policy is looking at, really raising the quality of life, raising global prosperity for all of us, but to also make sure that we're making it a sustainable conversation for our future generations. So a very good question that comes to mind right now is, how does my role come to play? Next slide, Chris. It would be, I thought really sharing this journey in terms of what Maersk is doing. And when we talk about integrated solutions, we look at the infrastructure that really means from moving goods from one side of the continent to the other. Maersk's vision is to create integrated logistics solutions that unleash our customers' potential. Customers are really telling us that the main problems that they are having when it comes to movement of goods and trade generally is man-made. And therefore, we have a very unique ability to solve them through our unique and solutions and logistics that present a huge opportunity. The journey that we have right now is the kind of infrastructure that we're looking to build across the 47 markets and plus across Africa. Port infrastructure, tracking, tracking from point of collection to destination, and not limited to warehousing. So if you think about that entire journey that is displayed on this slide, it really does entail quite a bit of infrastructural development that we can really see that will benefit in actualization of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. We want to look at making logistics in Africa and the world accessible to all customers by really eliminating complexities so that everyone can source, produce, sell their products anywhere, not just within Africa, but also out of Africa, and really create that platform where we can be able to say that it's a world, it's a global world, and we are free to trade. We want to democratize logistics. And clearly my role is about to get interesting, because when all this is put together, then storytelling comes to play. But next slide, Chris. And it is important to note that the best stories will come from us. We are the ones in Africa. We're the ones who need to create this content, curate this content, because as a lot of people have said that there's no better person to tell your story than yourself. So if we're to be able to really look at how we are positioning Africa and what the good things are being said within our continent, then we, the communicators practicing in the continent, are the frontliners. We are the recipients. We are the people who are out there engaging the customers, engaging our external and internal stakeholders to really showcase those successful moments. And what we're saying is there needs to be more deliberate action in curating what we would like to say, and looking at how do we showcase our company what are we doing when it comes to creating solutions that are transforming the business landscape, empowering transformation and innovation in the continent. And the next slide is a quick journey, a short journey in terms of how it all connects together from a communications perspective. To me, communication, especially in PR, is not a standalone. I am a preacher of integrated communications, looking at the owned, looking at the earned, looking at social media, because a lot of the news consumption right now is the minute it happens, it's landing on digital. And then next day reporting is on our own channel, which is called traditionally called the broadcast and the newspapers. Internal communications, how are we using our employees to be our brand advocate? And in turn, you can already see that there are quite some tangible opportunities that we can be able to already start to benefit. Enhanced media relation, because a journalist will always look for an interesting story to be able to peg to their onto their readers. Elevated brand awareness. It's important to note that all our customers, internal, external, will want to associate with a brand that is positive, that has a very good perception, both internally and externally. So elevated brand awareness is also something that we could begin to enjoy. Educational value. For me, what the benefits of really looking at the Africa and the benefits that we can be able to enjoy out of this is, how do we use a lot of these stories to curate educational content that can be studied in classroom, that can from all lower levels up to higher levels, and really look at that journey of making sure that the quality of education that we're offering is case studies of our own. Attraction, foreign direct investment is another opportunity. And again, it looks at what the employment growth trajectory that we can be able to create across the continent. And it is all through the power of storytelling. Moving on. this is a quick journey, and I'm going to borrow from Africa No Filter when I was just really thinking through, what exactly we need to have a discussion with for this webinar. And they say storytelling is the most powerful way for donor and non-governmental organizations to convey their work and stories, to allow audiences to connect both intellectually and at emotional level. And there's nothing as good as a good story, because it does have both of those connections. And for me, what I see is how we're able to, create your message house. What is the story that we're really telling out there, and how does it fit within the conversations of the FCTA? And are you targeting media that is aligned to your goals from a company perspective? And it's important, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that let's not look at media in silo. Right now, consumption of media is growing, and we have our own channels. A lot of organizations have got their own channels, both on social and blog pages. We still are enjoying the array of some of the media houses that have displayed in terms of the logos there, that are really looking to tell the African story. So for me is, let's look at how we curate that journey, and let's be deliberate, and let's not leave any of the available channels to be able to tell our Africa story and really portray Africa in a good light. As I end, I think there are amazing opportunities ahead. On the next slide, Chris. And for me, the last word that comes top of mind is partnership. The opportunity here for communicators is partnership. We're in a position to increase knowledge, because when we share a story, we share knowledge, we share expertise, then the available resources then start to scale. And for me, when you look at the issues that we need to tackle as a continent, they cannot be solved by one brand or two brands. It will need a lot of concerted effort and really help in enabling us to be able to shift the needle to where we really need to put Africa in. And those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Fantastic, very interesting. I should have said at the beginning, please, as we go through, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we can pick them up at the end with the panelists. So I see some questions have started coming through, so that's great. So keep them coming. Andrew.
Thanks, Chris, and hello, everyone. So firstly, I'm head of UK media for British International Investment, that until the end of last year was known as CDC Group. And prior to that was known as the Commonwealth Development Corporation, and prior to that was called the Colonial Development Corporation, founded in 1947. We are the world's oldest development finance institution and publicly owned impact investor. For those of you who are not necessarily, and I should say I don't have any slides prepared, so but for those of you who don't know who we are the UK's development finance institution. So that means we're owned by the UK government. Our shareholder is FCGO. We are a trusted investment partner to businesses in Africa. We invest for profit, but with a slightly lower investment return hurdle than private investors into Africa. So we invest between about 1.5 and 2 billion pounds every year, primarily to support the UK government's clean green infrastructure, clean and green initiative, and to create productive, sustainable, and inclusive economies in our markets. So each year we invest, we will invest over $1 billion into Africa. We have a total of 1,300 investments, of which about 2/3 are in Africa, and which infrastructure plays a major part, and particularly with a view to supporting infrastructure that helps African economies to become adaptable and more resilient to the climate emergency, which is a major part of what we do now. Over 30% of all the dollars we spend goes into climate finance. Obviously, Chris mentioned at the start that there was a huge infrastructure funding gap in Africa. I think the World Bank estimates it at around $100 billion a year, which is significant, obviously, and is a sum that I don't think is showing many signs of narrowing. As communicators, I am in a fortunate position in that as an impact investor, I get to talk about, I don't so much talk about roads or bridges or railways or ports. We always talk the language of impact. So jobs, climate resilience, alleviate energy poverty, alleviating data poverty. And that is a really supporting and supportive of communications throughout everything we do. So that's own media, that's stakeholder engagement, as well as kind of media relations. And that approach really does open doors to us where perhaps the people telling, I guess, traditional stories of infrastructure investment find harder to open. So in terms of audience, we obviously talk to a huge array of audiences within Africa itself, and that is entrepreneurs and business leaders. We obviously engage very heavily with local communities, as well as kind of governmental stakeholder groups, and foreign office colleagues in country as well. We also have to speak to our UK audience, our UK shareholder. We are ultimately owned by the taxpayer. So we have a job to actively communicate with not just our shareholder in Westminster, but also organisations like ICAI and the Overseas Development Committee and others, that NGOs and campaign groups, all of whom have a close interest in what we do, not least because our budget comes out of the overall UK aid budget. So as we invest for profit, we have to work really hard to continually demonstrate our value and demonstrate the impact that we are having in Africa and also parts of Asia where we also invest. So we're probably the largest private equity investor into Africa, arguably. So a lot of our investment comes through private equity funds as well as direct investments. So some of the sort of flagship investments within the infrastructure space that we've invested in over the last couple of years, we have a $1.7 billion partnership with DP World to expand 3 ports initially, and others subsequent to that. So that's Dakar in Senegal, Soknar in Egypt, and Berber in Somaliland. That was the biggest equity deal we've ever done, and could be valued at upwards and north of $700 million over the next few years. We're also a major player into digital infrastructure projects in Africa. So we're the largest shareholder in Liquid Telecom, that really provides a kind of backbone fibre optic connectivity throughout the African continent. We're also a partner in a consortium that was led by Vodafone and Safaricom that won an Ethiopian mobile license, and the potential of that to deliver countrywide impact is enormous. So yeah, we're very active right across the continent. We get about 500 to 600 pieces of coverage a year coming out of African publications. So we do a very, very rigorous press office job supported by colleagues on the ground in Africa. And then obviously we've got COP27 coming up. So that's occupying all our thoughts. It's the first COP in Africa for several years, and so much seen as Africa's COP, and the chance for African leaders to really articulate what the continent needs, particularly when it comes to infrastructure moving forward. So that is occupying a lot of our thoughts, and we will be rolling out an interesting campaign in a couple of weeks on that subject. So that's me for now.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. And just when you're talking about you know, your ultimate stakeholders being the UK taxpayers and the British government, and communicating to them the impact that comes from investment in infrastructure. Is that a sort of almost like an education job to sort of make people see that, you know, the impact of investments in infrastructure, like both digital and hard infrastructure, if you like ports and so on? Is that something that perhaps people don't realise the impact is so great in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the case from a wider UK audience perspective. There is, I mean, you know, infrastructure is so vital in it's the bedrock of any healthy functioning economy, and investments into infrastructure pay off time and time again. And it's, you know, as I said, it's particularly when it's part of the kind of the wider climate finance debate and where money should be going in terms of supporting those countries most vulnerable to the ravages of the climate emergency. Investment in infrastructure is absolutely vital. You know, you'll see us talking more and more about adaptation and resilience, particularly in the run up to COP and during COP. And it's an interesting question when it comes to, you know, the ability to, in some markets in Africa, to kind of leapfrog infrastructure. So, for example, technology has a huge role to play. So, you know, you don't need fixed line communications anymore. You can just you know, that infrastructure doesn't exist, so you just leapfrog it and do mobile. Particularly with financial services, the role of fintech in an African context is going to be absolutely vital. And the role of technology in monitoring and maintaining infrastructure investments is pretty key as well.
Yeah, and I suppose you're looking at sort of the environmental impact of infrastructure and demonstrating how, you know, different sorts of infrastructure investment can actually reduce carbon emissions or, you know, improve, you know, make an impact in terms of climate change. I guess is that almost like a kind of competing? Is it important to get that across with the thought that the environmental contribution of infrastructure investment?
Yeah, and I mean it's never easy, is it? Because, you know, when you build something, when you build a road or building or a, you know, a port, there's always a carbon cost attached to that. And those messages have to be managed. That we're always balancing, from a communication perspective and as an organization, balancing environmental considerations against the acute development need within the markets in which we invest. And in certain circumstances there, you know, there could be a perceived trade-off between one and the other. I mean, so the most obvious example being 600 million people in Africa don't have access to electricity still. You know, that is an incredibly acute need, and lack of electricity prevents, you know, parents from educating their children. It prevents, you know, people getting jobs. I mean, it prevents people getting access to data. I mean, it's crippling from an economic perspective. So, you know, the question then is, well, does that requirement overtake the requirement to build renewables rather than gas, for example? So those are the sort of debates that we're constantly having, and I think we'll see a lot of those debates around kind of clean infrastructure and particularly gas, you know, really get be the central topic at COP in Sharm el Sheikh in a few months.
Yeah, a question to Lillian and Andrew, to both of you really, is you mentioned, Lillian, about the importance of getting sort of positive stories about Africa out there. I wonder if you know, have struggled in any way to, because these tend to be positive, good news stories about Africa's development. And I wondered if, you know, the media, you found the media, you know, has an appetite to write about such stories.
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, in my journey, especially when handling, for example, I was in agency before, I was handling a power project, and sometimes I think when some of these stories are so political, they tend to really hide the beauty of a story and the impact a certain project would ideally land when it's completed. So this particular project was a power plant in one of the African countries, and sort of like the politicians in the market were divided, whether in a good camp thought it was a fantastic idea, and another good camp thought, you know, the country couldn't afford it, and it was, you know, it wasn't a project that needed to be designed at that particular point. So it was a bit of a struggle at the beginning of the stage in terms of just getting media to understand, you know, the value this particular project would bring to the country, and help them just move away from the politics and really get, you know, their perspective. It did, you know, we designed sort of like a media journey, and really having them go through farm trips, sitting down with some of our advisors when it comes to energy, and really looking at not just their market, but, you know, the energy requirements from a continent perspective, and helping them see the bigger picture. So it actually started from a crisis. The way we landed on that project was more of crisis management, but with the education and gradual engagement, it turned into a positive a story. And as opposed to us calling media, it was the other way around. Media were calling us for developments on the project and wanting to visit the facility to understand how much progress had been made. So there are a lot of those cases where either politics or a journalist doesn't fully understand what a project is. So it needs a bit of hand-holding and investing in a lot of education for them to be able to fully understand the value of a particular project. And those are some of the instances that I've encountered. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. So yeah, so I think it's important to draw the distinction between what African media looks for and wants, and UK media. And in very broad terms, African media is more receptive to developmental stories than the UK and media in the UK is. Now, if you've got a really big ticket size deal, the DP World, deal was a good example. Then the UK business press will pay attention. The FT will pay attention. Wall Street Journal will pay attention. Reuters, Bloomberg, both in country and in the UK, will pay attention. But to sell in a developmental story into the UK press is tricky. And there are some core titles that we talk to on a very regular basis. People like DevEx, Pioneer Post, and others. Thomson Reuters Foundation News is another one. But it's it is very hard to sell in developmental stories. It has to be said. And we get more traction from speaking to bureau chiefs in country than their head of news back in London. And that's generally the sort of the way we look to go. So we sort of we head up the local bureau heads rather than going into London. It seems to get a better response that way. But it's it is always tricky selling into developmental stories, and I think it's that you get occasions in the diary like COP when everyone's sort of talking about it. But even at COP, the challenge you have is that whatever Joe Biden says will make the headlines, and unless you've got sort of a $10 billion ticket story, you're not going to get any airtime, because the news environment there is so incredibly competitive. So you have to really think carefully about how you get your messages across, even in an environment like that. So it's tricky.
And any tips? I mean, what are you going to do at COP to make sure that Africa gets its voice heard?
So thank you for asking. Actually, so we are about to launch a campaign in a week or so called the African Climate Conversation. And because we have such a huge network of contacts through our investment, we're able to approach a huge array of really interesting thought leaders across Africa, who will all be contributing byline articles, videos, podcasts that we'll put on a platform that will live on our BAI website, to provide insights into every aspect of the kind of the climate emergency debate. So we're going to have articles on climate and gender. We've got articles on climate refugees. We've got articles on energy transition and what that means. We've got people like James Mwingi, Mo Ibrahim, Stripe Singwe, Carlos Lopez, Antonio Pedro, and various others who are all contributing to the platform. So it's really a way of amplifying African thought leadership and letting those leaders, be they entrepreneurs or business leaders or government leaders or academics or youth activists, to help provide their insights and really bring to life their expertise on a single platform. So, and that decision was taken. The kind of the rationale for the campaign was, African leaders generally don't get their fair share of airtime when it comes to events like COP, And secondly, you know, who better tell these stories than the storytellers themselves? I mean, you know, they can do it much better than we can. So all we need to do is to facilitate a platform to give them the opportunity to do so. So that platform will be going live, touch wood, in a week, I hope, or so, maybe. We'll have about probably between 30 to 40 different contributors by the time we get to COP itself. So that's quite exciting, and we'll be providing all that content copyright free. So any newspaper editor or opinion editor or you know, feature editor can take any of that content and republish it in their publications. So we're going to try and multiply our audience that way. And if anyone on this call has interesting potential contributors who might like to chip in some thoughts, then by all means get in touch.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew told me about this initiative a while ago, and I had one of those sort of, I wish I'd thought of that moments, because I wish I'd thought of that. It's just such a genius idea. And because even though COP is going to be in Africa this year, you know, I'm sure it'll be no different to any other year, where, as you say, all the attention will go to the Americans and the Europeans and so on. So setting up your own sort of media channel to get Africa's voice out, I think is a really fantastic initiative. I really look forward to you know, joining it and so on, hearing. So yes, so thank you for that. Great. Well, perhaps we could open it up now to some questions. We've got a few already coming in, so please do keep the questions coming in. Somebody has asked, what are some of the best examples of storytelling that have resonated for you, Lillian?
I would be lying if I can pinpoint on one, because just coming from, you know, agency and into corporate life, and storytelling has been part of this entire journey. It's hard to pinpoint one, but I can really say that it's not the same as when I started 15 years ago, because when I started, it was more of, can we just get into media? Just get me a photo and let's be in the media. And it was, if not that, it was more of crisis management. But now you see brands really giving prominence to communication and storytelling efforts within, and looking at how are we positioning ourselves from an external perspective. And so you'll find a lot of the stories are now online, and talking about education, some really groundbreaking innovations coming out of health, students participating in what we call global hackathons that are being hosted by, you know, brands from all over, and really looking at what are the needs of the continent and how do we use our own solutions to create some of the solutions. So those stories are already out there. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to say this particular one, but I have seen amazing stories across the sectors: health, education, in technology, and I think for me, what I'm also going to see, I'm also going to preach is that let's also look at you know, how we also then tap into the benefits that the Africa Free Trade Agreement is looking to drive, and see how we also participate in those conversations and those particular themes that they've identified are the key areas for us. I like what you mentioned, Andrew, in terms of, you know, looking at energy, looking at sustainability, and those are some of the center conversations. And I don't think there's any African leader who doesn't have the topic of energy on top of their list, because I think for Africa to move forward, we'll need a lot of conversations that are centered around energy. So if there's any one of the participants joining and you're in those particular fields, let's get those stories out there. When I joined Musk, there's an interesting project that I found the team working on, and it was learnings from COVID, as I can give one example from where I am. And it's about a very perishable good called a flower. And obviously, a lot of our shipments, especially to the UK, where we have the largest market from Kenya, have been going via air. And here is COVID, airports are shut down. Like you can literally think about the entire journey. There are the very lean workers on site to harvest the flowers. The journey to the airport, the airport also is working on very lean staff, and the flights are not actually going out. So you can imagine from an investment perspective in the country, those flowers were not going out. So Maersk decided to work on a product that would then support customers sending flowers to the UK to experiment via sea. Obviously, it's not the same time lead. Air is a day or two to get to end of destination. Sea will take a couple of weeks. So you looking at that product and how it has been designed, understanding what do we need the flower, in what state do we need the flower so that it can survive the entire 20+ days on sea up until end destination, and to make sure that we have vase life for the end customer. That needed a lot of work and a lot of expertise from our researchers, from the team at the port to really design that product. And today we have customers shipping flowers via sea, and it also goes to looking at our carbon footprint. Sending the flowers via sea is very it's reducing our carbon emissions by quite a significant percentage over air. And this is a product that has really taken the market by storm. So you should be able to see that story out there. And it's something that I'm quite excited about in terms of what are the solutions that we are creating to be able to really help our customers, our African traders, to really move on to the next, to tackle some of the issues we're facing that are quite unprecedented, as we may say. So that is a story that, I can say top of mind right now, but again, a lot, tons and tons of beautiful stories out there.
No, thank you, Lily. That's a great story. The question I've got for you, Lillian, you mentioned about you spend a lot of time getting information into schools, if I understood you correctly. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that. Why is that so important to you to reach school children?
Actually, the point was in terms of as a benefit of enhanced communication. A lot of these stories can be used as case studies in the classroom.
Right.
I don't know if you've watched, there's a viral video going around from a minister in Ghana, asking why, just questioning the school curriculums in Africa and why some of the students are not asking questions. And it's just in the conversations of how we're rethinking education. And for me is, I looked at it in the form of an advantage, a very immediate advantage of enhanced communication is that there is awareness of what is happening within our continent. And our education developers, our curriculum developers will consider this content to be able to table it in the classrooms and really redesign content that it was going to speak to the 21st century employee. Because if you look at what I probably went through as a school curriculum, the needs have really changed. For me to be able to get into the job market, I will need to look at a curriculum that is looking at today's job market. And I think how well I looked at the importance or the value that communications or PR would do to the education sector is providing content.
Great, thank you. I've got a question from the audience for Andrew, asking how you target particular regions or areas of Africa in terms of your investments for infrastructure.
Well, we have a number of kind of countries within Africa where we have larger offices. and where the markets are frankly more developed and more receptive to infrastructure investment. So in no particular order, those, and I'm not necessarily going to go through all of them, but obviously South Africa is a key market, and we're an important vehicle for climate finance to decarbonize the South African energy market, which is obviously very heavily reliant on coal still. Nigeria is an important market. Kenya is an important market. Egypt is an important market for us. And in terms of infrastructure, these tend to be places that are sort of more receptive to inward investment. That said, obviously we have through our partnership with DP World, we're investing in Somaliland, probably one of the few Western investors in Somaliland. So there's no sort of, so part of the answer is to do with, yeah, how ready those countries are to receive investments inevitably. How we approach communication in those markets is really, we really look to leverage our country heads heavily. So a lot of our kind of in-market comms activity is focused around supporting origination, i.e., building the pipeline of inward investments, or other people coming to us with potential investment ideas, and really building the thought leadership of our country heads, so they become the kind of go-to voice on wider issues, not just to do with what BII is doing in any given week.
Thank you. I've got a couple of other questions, or lots of questions actually. One question is, a big challenge with telling stories about infrastructure development is how to estimate its value. For instance, the economic benefit of a railway line. How have you navigated this? How have you explained the impact of an infrastructure investment in a way that the media and others can understand?
So very, I mean, not wanting to be clear, but we have every investment we make, there's a huge intentionality at the point of investment, right? So it's not just about what return are we going to get on our investment over 10 years or 20 years. It is, what is the impact that we can make through that investment? So we will always invest to bring about positive economic, social, and environmental change, as well as making a modest financial return. So as part of that investment process, there is a huge amount of work that's done by our impact team to really work out what that sort of granular impact is at the point of investment. So I'm very fortunate in that I get massive information dropped onto my desk whenever there's a kind of a big deal announcement that is due to go out. So I'm somewhat fortunate in that there's a huge team of people in the building who provide all that data for me, and it's very robust data. And actually, that when we work alongside big private businesses like Safaricom or DP World, more often than not, we end up leading the communications because we hold all that fantastic impact data, and that's really the stuff that makes a story stand out. As I said, the story's not about bridges or ports or railways or roads. It's about jobs and opportunities and unleashing the potential of the countries and the communities in which we invest.
Great, thank you. Another question for Andrew, actually, but I'm sure also Lillian, you would have some thoughts, because I'm sure you're thinking about COP now. Any other practical tips for how African stories can get out during COP, how we can contribute towards the dialogue, but also how we can improve communications beyond COP, before and after?
Yeah, from the experience of COP26 in Glasgow, we basically took a view early on that by the time we get into COP, anything we have to say, and we're talking about billion-dollar commitments, are just going to get lost in the noise. So unless you have something incredibly significant to announce, you ought to imagine that you're not going to get any coverage whatsoever out of COP itself, unless if there's a particularly powerful local story, you might get some local pickup. You probably will get local pickup, but you're not going to get any sort of thing bigger than that. So and that's just the unfortunate reality. And I know there's hundreds of journalists who are going to be there, but from a practical perspective, they're all locked in the green zone, and only your chief executive is allowed in the green zone, and everyone else is going to be shut out on the periphery. and it's very actually hard on a sort of boots on the ground level to actually, deliver a sharp elbow to a target journalist in that environment. So what we've done and what we're doing again this year is to make sure that we spend a lot of time speaking to journalists in the month or two running up to COP, saying, these are our people, this is what they're good at speaking about, this is their expertise, this is their mobile number, come to us now, let's have a conversation, let's provide some off the record guidance if we can on what the big topic's going to be, in the hope and expectation that when we actually get into COP and somebody suddenly wants a quote on gas power in Tanzania or something like that, they'll get us on the phone and we can help. So there's a lot of groundwork that has to be laid, and I would tell all your internal stakeholders, your MDs and your CEOs who are looking over your shoulder expecting to get great coverage out of something they're announcing at COP, let them know now they won't, and then there'll be a much easier conversation to have when you get into the second week of COP and you've not had any coverage.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that is the hardest thing to do, and you can imagine the amount of investment brands would put in to be able to be present at such an event. And earlier on, I did mention that sometimes it's good to look at your integrated approach. When and is proving to be difficult, why not use your own channels to be able to tell your story? You will participate in the different forums that you've signed for at COP, but it doesn't stop you from telling your story using your own channels. So if there is, in the absence of a really significant announcement, it's okay to share your thoughts using your LinkedIn channels, your Twitter channels, or probably you have a blog and you could just give a summary of your expectations at the event and what you'd like to see happen in your particular region. We employed it once for similar event and it worked magic. So in the absence of getting any earned media, use your own channels, send out the story.
Right, thank you. Got another question here. It is a question we often get. How do both Andrew and Lillian measure the impact of what they do in terms of the in terms of the results you achieve? How do you measure that within your organizations?
It's a good question, and it's a question that I think the whole communications industry wrangles over, and there's various metrics in terms of audience and sentiment and so on and so forth, and I mean, I think you can generally use any number of tools to deliver a report that demonstrates that you're doing a good job if you need to. I mean, I think in terms of those sort of metrics don't take into account the things that you've managed not to get in the press, or that things that you've managed, issues that you've managed to, crisis management situations that you've managed to mitigate and make better than they might have been otherwise. So I think it's the best way of working out whether you're having an impact is to speak to your internal stakeholders, right? So for the case of BII, we know we're doing a good job in Egypt. If our head of Egypt comes back to us and says, I've had lots of positive feedback from that coverage, and I've got lots more opportunities on my desk now, and so forth. But I look, I'm a bit old school about this. I don't think there's any one sort of, method wrapped up with a nice red bow that will tell you whether you're doing a good job or not. I think you'll generally know, and your internal stakeholders will know, and that's probably enough.
Lillian, how do you do it?
Yeah, I share the same sentiment, and somebody actually had shared a similar question online, and I've answered. I think for me, before any campaign, is understanding your objectives and what exactly you're looking to earn or gain from a particular campaign. Is it product awareness? Is it brand visibility? And the bouquet can be as big as it can get. And it starts with the internal stakeholders. Why are we really doing this? And where do we want to go at the end of the campaign, be it a year or the duration that has been set? And then constantly evaluating, are we on track? Because you know, it's not a sale where you put products on a table and say, guys, come and buy. And at the end of the day, you'll have sold 7 and remained with 3 if you had 10. PR is about perception and really changing the mind. And that is a journey. It's not a one-day, it's a one-day affair. And so you find there are a lot of tactics that you employ in that entire journey to be able to really shift a particular perception or a particular notion of what you want your customers or consumers to perceive about your brand. So I go by the Barcelona principles. They continue to guide me as a particular PR practitioner, but also feedback. We've seen at the end of a campaign some amazing feedback from sales saying, you know, guys, thank you so much for supporting us for this product launch, for example, because we now have 3 customers that have already booked with us and we are good to go, for example. So it can be various sources of feedback and measuring how a successful a campaign has been, but it wouldn't be one.
Thank you. There's an interesting question here about any thoughts that you might have on often claims that huge national debt in Africa is linked to infrastructure investment by government. And I wondered if there's if that's the sort of issue you've sort of struggled with in terms of the media.
I mean, we don't invest in governments. We don't invest in state-owned enterprises typically. So we only invest in private companies, and sometimes that's debt financing, but more often than not, it's equity. So it's not a question that we directly have to deal with in terms of our operations. Obviously, we are in an environment where the global investment actors on the kind of the African stage, their role and their models are coming under increasing scrutiny. We have a foreign secretary who's now a prime minister who had some fairly strong things to say about malign actors in Africa, and the role of the role of the UK's development finance institution in countering those actors. But we are generally we're an apolitical organization, right? We've been around since 1947 and countless governments since then. We're not political actors in that sense. Clearly, I think more and more African leaders are coming to the conclusion that they need to move beyond extractive industries and the typical methods of financing those extractive industries, which keeps African countries right at the bottom of the value food chain. DRC is home to 70% of the world's cobalt mining. Why doesn't it have electric battery factories in the country, for example? So those are the sort of questions that are being asked, and I think that for us as an impact investor, we are very much an equal partner to the businesses and the organizations that we work with in Africa. And as I said, we deliberately set out to achieve equitable outcomes for all parties. So but I think that on a sort of a macro level, I think the African continent, as diverse as it is, I think is that people like players like the African Union, for example, are increasingly speaking on behalf of increasing number of countries when it comes to questions around infrastructure, and particularly energy infrastructure, and what they're going to be expecting out of COP. But those demands are going to be within the context of how do we monetize our natural capital, our forests, our rainforests, for example. How do we support our own industrialization rather than simply exporting commodities to the energy hungry Europe and North America? So I think that the narrative is moving beyond questions of government debt to looking at vehicles and methods to support infrastructure development that is more equitable and support Africa's industrialization needs in the context of climate emergency. And I think that's a really interesting space.
Interesting. Lillian, any thoughts on that?
Similar to Andrew, I think a lot of our projects are directly sponsored by Musk. So, but of course we do collaborate with the various governments. So it's not an issue for us.
Yeah, because there's obviously sort of, you know, big geopolitical moves with, as you said, Andrew, sort of different actors around globally, sort of also looking to sort of build infrastructure across Africa, but perhaps for sort of different motives. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we're coming up to the end, so I just wanted really to thank everybody. We've got lots of questions. There's lots of questions, Andrew. People wanting to know how they can participate in your COP initiative. So
if you everyone just the easiest email address to reach me on is press, so PRESS @BII.co.uk. I'm just going to double check that I've given you the right address now. Hang on a second. So that'll be press@BII.co.uk.
We'll send your email around. We'll send an email around with that information as well.
Great.
No, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good. So just it's left me to thank both Lillian and Andrew for being really interesting speakers, and to all of you for all your questions. I hope you've enjoyed the session. Please check out Africa Communicators Exchange website for future events and keep an eye out for those. So thank you very much for coming, and thanks to our speakers, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.